Kunja Vihari Jayam Gopijana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Giri Varadari Jayam Gopijana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Jasharanandana Jaya Brajajana Ranjana Jaya Brajajana Ranjana Jaya Jasharanandana Jaya Brajajana Ranjana Jaya Brajajana Ranjana Jaya Jamunati Ravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Jamunati Ravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. So, ist Englisch okay? Sprichst du Englisch? Verstehst du Englisch? Katharina, sprichst du Englisch? Verstehst du? Ha? Nicht so gut? Also verstehen? Nee. Kannst du zufällig übersetzen? Traust du das zu? Kannst du übersetzen? Er könnte es versuchen auf jeden Fall. So ist immer so. Wenn die Lecture anfängt, gehen alle wieder. Asti Gopal meinte neulich, newly said, and then I would say it. It's maybe too heavy. Yeah, sure, you can come here actually. This is the side of the girls and yeah, you can somehow, then I don't have to turn my neck too much. So, we are Reading from the introduction, one verse. Bharatamrita sarvasham Vishnu-bhaktad vinishritam Gita gangodakam pitva punarjanma navidyate. One who drinks the water of the Ganges attains salvation. So what to speak of one who drinks the nectar of the Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is the essential nectar of the Mahabharata, and it is spoken by Lord Krishna himself, the original Vishnu. Bhagavad Gita comes from the mouth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the Ganges is said to emanate from the lotus feet of the Lord. Of course, there is no difference between the mouth and feet of the Supreme, but for an impartial study, we can appreciate that the Bhagavad Gita is even more important than the water of the Ganges. Bhagavad Gita ki jai. So you're reading from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8. Attaining the Supreme, verse 11. Yadaksharam vedavido vadanti vishanti yadyatayo vitaragaha yadichanto brahmacharyam charanti tate padam sangrahena pravakshe. Yat, that which, aksharam, syllable om, veda vidaha, persons conversant with the Vedas, vadanti, say, vishanti, enter, yat, in which, yata yachaha, great sages, vitaragaha, in the renounced order of life, yat tat, that which, sorry, just yat, not yat tat, I read the English as saying Sanskrit, ichantaha, desiring, brahmacharyam, celibacy, charanti, practice, tat, that, te, unto you, padam, situation, sangrahena, in summary, pravakshye, I shall explain. Translation on purpose by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Persons who are learned in the Vedas, who utter Omkara, and who are great sages in the renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. One more time. Persons who are learned in the Vedas, who utter Omkara, and who are great sages in the renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Purport. Lord Sri Krishna has recommended to Arjuna the practice of Chakra Yoga, in which one places the air of life between the eyebrows. Taking it for granted that Arjuna might know how to practice Chakra Yoga, the Lord explains the process in the following verses. The Lord says that Brahman, although one without a second, has various manifestations and features, especially for the impersonalist. The akshara or omkara, the syllable om, is identical with Brahman. Krishna here explains the impersonal Brahman, in which the renounced order of the sages enter. In the Vedic system of knowledge, students from the very beginning are taught to vibrate Om and learn of the ultimate impersonal Brahman by living with the spiritual master in complete celibacy. In this way, they realize two of Brahman's features. This practice is very essential for the student's advancement in spiritual life. But at this moment, At the moment, such brahmachari, unmarried celibate, life is not at all possible. The social construction of the world has changed so much that there is no possibility of one practicing celibacy from the beginning of student life. Throughout the world, there are many institutions for different departments of knowledge, but there is no recognized institution where students can be educated in the brahmachari principles. Unless one practices celibacy, advancement in spiritual life is very difficult. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya has announced, according to the spiritual injunctions of this age of Kali, that in this age no process of realizing the Supreme is possible except the chanting of the holy names of the Lord, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So one more time the verse. Yadaksharam Veda Vido Vadadanti Vishanti Yadyatayo Vitaragaha Yadichanto Brahmacharyam Charanti Tate Padam Sangrahena Pravakshye. Persons who are learned in the Vedas, who utter Omkara, and who are great sages in the renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyanangirena Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jayatam Surato Pangor Mamamanda Amatergati Matsarvasva Padam Vajo Radhamadana Mohano Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpadrumada Srimad Ratnangara Simhasanasto Srimad Radha Srila Govinda Devo Preshtalivi Sayamana Usmarami Srimandra Sarasaram Vi Vamsivata Tatastitaha Karshamvino Swanar Gopir Gopinata Shri Estunaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopipakanta Radhakanta Namastate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishavano Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ramo Rama Rama Hare Hare. Sing Hare Bhagwan Ki Jai. So this is very interesting. The Prabhu has mentioned the word Shat Chakra Yoga. Shat Chakra Yoga. So the 6 chakras, 6 chakra yoga. Some people actually, even some modern day yoga teachers, they propound chakras don't exist. So this is modern day yoga. While most people actually who are somehow connected to the yoga tradition, the mystical tradition of yoga and meditation, there is some basic understanding about the 6 chakras. So the 6 chakras, they are energy centers located in the body, 6 chakras. And chakra, of course, means wheel, a wheel. And a wheel is rotating. So in a similar way, these are energy centers where energy is rotating. And they are, you could say, related to different psychological aspects of existence. So gradually, you could say, from the base chakra, the root chakra, going upward, the consciousness level changes through different stages. So in the very root, we have the you could say sensual material attachments that we have to overcome. Very basic attachments to sensual enjoyment, sexuality, eating. All of this is located in the root chakra and is represented by the colors of red. So red is not the color of love. That is further up. Actually, each one of those chakras is also associated with a very specific color. There's a whole science of colors. in relation to the planets, but also in relation to the chakras. There's a science of colors. So who knows what is the color of love or the heart chakra? Green, yes, green. Yeah. So some people say, some people don't like green, because Islam is green, but it's not true. Islam, green is very beautiful, it's everywhere in nature. And green is actually the color of love, like in the chakra science. But Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj specifically pointed out that green is the color of Madhurya Rasa. So Madhurya Rasa, what is that? Madhurya Rasa is actually the highest loving exchange between the Supreme and his devotees. So Madhurya Rasa, green is the color of Madhurya Rasa. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur even is said to have used green cloths regularly, just to have this, green color energy of, the heart chakra, of Madhurya Rasa, of true love. And this is very, very, very important to understand, because nowadays very often we just confuse or misuse the word love in all kind of circumstances where it actually does not really fit. Even McDonald's uses the word, I'm loving it, and this is the so-called fish love, fish love. Fish love is when somebody, you see somebody cooking a fish in the pan and you ask, what are you doing? I love fish. Poor fish, So this is not true love, There's nothing to do with love. This is just lust, desire, raga, So the word we have here also is raga. Raga is this very strong attachment and hankering to want, to use, to exploit, to enjoy something, raga. Raga dvesha, it's very strong, this pulling, of the desires, and like in general you could say in Eastern philosophy, raga or strong desire, kama, is considered to be the root of all suffering. It's because we are in need of something that we actually suffer. And like in German we say wunschlos glücklich, so this hankering, this wanting for something creates a situation where you actually are incomplete and you're lacking something. So actually truly happiness, or here the word salvation is used, moksha, to transcend, to liberate yourself from material detachment, happens by vittaraga. Vittaraga. So vittaraga is when you give up the attachments. So this is in theory very, very good, makes sense, So there are attachments that attach you to this world. So I will just stop them, reject them, renounce them, and then I will be free, But in reality, that's certainly not enough. And already the second part is mentioned here. A few things are mentioned here. The first one is Yat Aksharam Veda Vidaha. So this is two things. Veda Vidaha is to have Vedic knowledge, to have understanding, philosophical understanding. And this is also a form of yoga, actually. If you understand your position, you actually will be capable to remove yourself from a position which is bad. If you don't understand what your position is, you can't actually change your position. You first need to understand where you are before you move anywhere. Just like on a map, if you want to go somewhere, the first point is figuring out your location. You find out your location, then you can move. Then you know where you're going. So this is Veda Vidaha. Veda Vidaha, persons conversant with the Vedas. When you are conversant with the Shastra Chakshu, when you start perceiving reality through the glasses or the magnifying glasses of Veda, of knowledge, of understanding. And this is also used in the Yoga Sutras. It's explained as being, I forgot the Sanskrit word, but when you have spiritual knowledge, you actually have like a magnifying glass. You can actually start seeing things as they really are. Abhijatasva eva, is the word. Abhijatasya eva is like a perfectly born jewel. Abhijatasva eva manehe. So mani means the jewel. So a jewel could be like a crystal. And you look at the crystal, a perfect crystal. Perfectly clear. You look through it and you can see much clearer. Especially if you have bad eyes. So this analogy is used to explain that Vedic realization goes beyond just theory. So Veda Vidaha does not just mean memorizing, theory, which is the foundation, but all theory needs to be applied and realized. Only when theory is applied and realized does it actually gain value. So this is a very, very, very important point. We have Jnana Vijnana, Jnana Vijnana Pragya also. Jnana is the theory that we learn. We can hear so much theory. You can read all the Bhagavad Gita, all the Srimad Bhagavatam, and still be in Maya. So, therefore, there's this famous saying that actually 1 gram, of realization is much more valuable than a ton of theoretical knowledge. Because only the realizations actually count. Only the realizations actually count. And that's why, in one sense, theory might be a burden also. We have some examples, like for example, the residents of Vrindavan, they have very little theoretical knowledge actually. In different situations it becomes evident, For example, Nanda Maharaj, Krishna's father, in different situations, you can see he has a very simple, very basic understanding of, external phenomenal reality or Vedic texts, Very simple, but he has understood the essence, So what really counts ultimately is understanding the essence, or also the gopis of Vrindavan. They're actually very simple cowherd girls, but they realize something which is, beyond our perception, beyond the greatest scholars, cannot really touch it, Or in the Damodarastaka, there's this very famous sequence where it's explained that, how is it that Mother Yashoda, when Krishna was naughty, he was stealing butter, It's coming soon again. We'll start singing the beautiful Damodarastaka. It's a very special time of the year. And it's one of the most incredible, you could say, reflections many acharyas have. How Mother Yashoda just ran behind Krishna and caught him, So the great mystics, are doing exactly what this verse is saying, They're learning all the Vedas, they're uttering the Omkara, meditating, they're restraining their senses, Vittaragaha, they're, rejecting anything sensuous, or external, and they are attaining a level of moksha, liberation, They practice celibacy. But they have attained so much and might be very accomplished in all of this, they cannot still catch the Supreme, They cannot even grasp fully the Supreme nature of Krishna. And there is Mother Yashoda running after Krishna with a stick, and she caught him, Not only that, afterwards Mother Yashoda takes Krishna because he was naughty and binds him to a mortar, so he can't do any nonsense anymore, So how is it possible? How is it possible for Mother Yashoda, who did not, practice chanting Omkara, who might not have studied all the Vedas, how is it possible for her to actually catch Krishna, attain Krishna, control Krishna? The devotee controls Krishna. Even Krishna is Swarat. He's completely independent, not to be conquered by anyone. There is something that conquers Krishna. There is something that attracts Krishna. So if we remain by the Chakra yoga, I'll just focus on 2. So the very base, of the chakras is desire, lust, And the which one is it, like the fourth or fifth chakra? I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so the 1, 2, 3. The third from underneath is the heart chakra. So the heart chakra is green. The fourth. Okay, I'm counting wrong. Manipura. 7 chakras. 1, 2. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. 7. Sahasrara chakra, at the top. So the central chakra, the heart, is the chakra of the heart and the color of green, color of love. And this is, you could say, the key also. If you understand the nature of, clearly understand the difference between the nature of love and the nature of lust, then we can actually find the true solution for attaining perfection without necessarily having to, you could say, painstakingly or with much endeavor, fight all the ragas. There will be so many ragas coming, so many desires, distractions, and the pull of the senses is very, very strong. Vacha vegam manasa krodha vegam. So this vegam is an urge. It pushes you. It's very, very strong. The urges of the mind, the urges of anger, the urges of tongue, belly, and genitals. So all of those urges are very, very, very difficult to overcome. And it is possible by discipline, by meditation, by abstinence, but it's actually not very blissful. It's tough. It's just tough. So the true, easy and simple way, like Prabhupada basically paraphrases that in the last part of the purport. He's basically saying at the end of the purport that it's not possible to follow brahmacharya, because that's what it cooks down to ultimately. It cooks down to celibacy. Celibacy is the most difficult part of sensual control. So it's not really possible in this Kali Yuga, he says, to actually follow celibacy, because throughout the world there's so many institutions of learning, but student life, traditionally the idea of student life would be situation of where you actually try to apply the highest standards of living. That's the idea of brahmacharya. Actually, you try to, in your brahmachari times, you try to put the standard as high as possible. And that's the opportunity you also have when you're a brahmachari, because you have no other obligation than to raise your standards. Basically, that's all you have to do. In every level of life, you can raise your standards. You can really try to achieve a high standard of, existence, and then, you can try to maintain it as long as possible. And at one point, natural will drop. So the higher you had your standards as a brahmachari, the less you could say you will fall down as well. You get the idea? So that's the principle that's important to understand. It's good to keep a very high standard, because once you stop being a brahmachari, naturally the standards will decrease. So the higher you were, the higher you will also end up once you fall down, or once you retrace, once you have to confront reality, in many ways as well. So yes, this is what Prabhupada is saying here, that actually it is very difficult, because nowadays student life is exactly the opposite. Student life for most people is party time. That's the time where you actually Haribol. That's the time when students actually, they in modern days do exactly the opposite of brahmachari should be doing. So instead of having a very regulated life, extremely unregulated, there are those who might be very dedicated to their studies, but the dominant student life culture, it's all about drugs, sexuality, long weekends, and then trying to hustle somehow and put your papers into the university, And many people don't even do that, Many people are students, for many, many years, and never finish their studies, so student life. Very different than the idea of a brahmachari student life. Brahmachari student life is actually, it's barely, to be found. In some gurukulas, in Mayapur we have a very good example, Bhaktivedanta Academy, and there used to be a few more in ISKCON. I also went to Gurukula in Peru, which was, small and not so long-lived. In Brazil, there used to be a pretty big one in Nova Gokula farm. Many students also went there. So yes, this ideal of Gurukul life, even I was in Gurukul only full-time, until I was 7, 8 was full ashram Gurukul, and then until 12 was just day school Gurukul. It leaves such a strong impression. It leaves a strong impression for the rest of your life, because you could say the ideals are very clear. If you have a Gurukula experience, it's very difficult for you to actually forget what's the ideal, and that's actually very important to have very clearly understood what is the ideal. In many situations, we will actually encounter that we are not the ideal. That's very tough also. You might have noticed, you read the books, and then you're like, that's not me, They're not describing what I can do, Many people encounter that, especially when you read Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Devotion is very, very clear, very to the point, and very soon you realize, phew, so that's what I was supposed to be doing all the time, but I'm not sure I'm really matching, So that can create a situation where you actually become maybe depressed even. You're like, I can't do it, I can't do it. How am I supposed to do this, This is too high, It's impossible. So that's not a problem actually. It's very important to understand the ideal and to always try to raise yourself towards the ideal. It's no problem if you're not there yet. It's very important to understand that point. You have to be honest, where you are, what your shortcomings are, and it's wrong to question the ideal, because that's also what we might try to do. Is maybe the ideal is too high, maybe we should change the ideal so I can do it, But that's also not the right approach. So there's, you could say, two possible errors. One is to say, because I can't do it, I just might as well leave it, You might become depressed. Or you try to change and adjust the ideal, So it's more, fitting to what you can do. But in reality, that's not the way. The way to do it, and I fortunately forgot to memorize this verse, but it's a very awesome verse in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, which basically says that it is to be expected that the senses will win, again and again, The senses will win. The senses are very strong, And the senses are, the mind is willing, the flesh is weak, is the saying, You understand in theory, but then the flesh, the body, the senses, they decide to do the opposite very often, of what your ideal is. So it is possible, it is necessary, maybe I should say, to be honest and still always, look up to the ideal, and move, step by step, trying to approach the ideal as much as you can. Or there's the other approach that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's, you could say, in one sense, brahmachari life, where Krishna says in the 12th chapter, the entire 12th chapter, almost all of it, the beginning especially, is talking about the ideal. Krishna says, and this is Bhakti Yoga, he says, always think of me in full absorption and trance, samadhi. And then he says, if you can't do that, then practice Bhakti Yoga. That means there is, certain, practices you can do. Prabhupada also very often says in his purports, the idea is to 24 hours think of Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. And you're like, okay, how am I supposed to do that? You can't. So because we can't always be absorbed in Krishna, we practice bhakti yoga. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So any of those items, hearing, chanting, cleaning the temple, offering prayers, cooking for Krishna, serving Krishna, surrendering to Krishna, worshipping Krishna, anything we do in a temple basically is bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga. You follow the rules and regulations of bhakti yoga, and then by doing that, you might be able to then always think of Krishna. But then Krishna goes even further, and he says, okay, if you can't, follow the rules of bhakti yoga, no problem. You can work for me. You can work for me. And maybe like in a farm like we have here, it's a combination of those two, more or less, where you can just work for Krishna, whatever capacities, abilities you have, you work for Krishna, because you might not be able to all day do bhakti yoga services directly. So you work for Krishna. You might be repairing a car, or construction or gardening, anything you can do, you apply it in Krishna's service. So you work for Krishna. Karma yoga, nishkarma karma yoga. You just do it as voluntary work. You just work for Krishna. Like Frank, he cleansed the whole windows, the mirrors. Now it's shiny, First wet, then he polished them, Now they're shiny. So any capacity that you have, if you put it in Krishna's service, you will come to the position where more and more you start seeing it as a direct service for Krishna. In the beginnings, you're just doing what you're used to do, but then at one point you realize, I'm cleaning for Krishna. I'm cooking for Krishna. I'm working for Krishna. I'm doing it for Krishna. So it becomes seva. It becomes part of bhakti yoga as well. But then you might not be able to do that as well. You're like, I'm working and working here. I have no money. Where's my security? What is my future? So then Krishna says, no problem. You can work, outside, whatever you are doing, whatever you're good at, whatever job you can get. You can work outside, and then you can give the fruits of your work to Krishna. And Prabhupada then even explains this a little bit further and says, maybe you don't want to give it to Krishna. That can also happen. You're like, the devotees, they're just leaving the lights all the time on, Why should I donate to the temple? They're just wasting energy, Maybe you think that, whatever, you might be critical, You don't trust the devotees, they will use your money, properly. Then Prabhupada says that you should still donate. Whenever you have money, it is good to detach from a portion of the money you have. If you don't do that, you will not get purified. It's very powerful to give donations. And Prabhupada says, even if you give it to a charitable institution or anything, it could be even something mundane. It's better to give something than to just keep it, to yourself. So it's extremely purifying, because the money that you have is it's energy. Usually it's the result of your karma, of your work. You work and then there's money. So if this money, if you just keep it for yourself and reuse it, there's no real benefit. You're not progressing. You're getting stuck. You're just, doing something, receiving something, doing something, receiving something. You're not advancing. If you want to advance, or progress, you need to detach from some of that money. Then there will be some change in your consciousness. You will feel it. It might be painful. If you're like, oh, you want to give it? I could do so many nice things with this money. Okay, I'll give it away. And once you do it, you feel this relief actually. When you give something, to be generous. It increases your character. Your qualities become more, more refined. Maybe more sattvic also. Because charity is is sattvic. To give, to be generous. In rajas, you just desire for yourself. In tamas, you don't even really care. You don't even think about donating. Like that. But the final conclusion then is, it goes back to the beginning of this verse. Then Krishna says, you might not even want to donate, because you're just like, why should I donate? It's my money. then Krishna says, you can develop knowledge. Through knowledge, information, you can get some realization. So that's the beginning of this verse, Veda Vidaha. The more you become conversant and acquainted with Vedic ideas, Vedic knowledge, you can be inspired to start this process. So brahmacharya is when you just try to live the ideal, and you try to maintain it as long as possible. Then you realize, okay, I can't keep it, full time, just brahmachari, just chanting. So I have to go a little bit down, see where I can fit, until you find a position where you're stable. And then from that position, you can again go up towards transcendence. But I'll just read the last part of the purport. The ultimate conclusion from this entire discussion, Prabhupada just says, because he was saying, technically, brahmachari principles, or vitaraga, strong renunciation, detachment in Kali Yuga, very unlikely, especially for students. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya has announced, according to the scriptural injunctions for this age of Kali, that in this age, no process of realizing the Supreme is possible except the chanting of the holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this simple chanting of the mantra is actually the key and the core. Without that, we wouldn't be able to really sustain our spiritual life for long. Because in reality, most people who somehow get in touch with the scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, very soon they realize, well, the ideal is amazing, and I wish I could be like that, but maybe I'm not that yet. So that might leave you in a position where you try to figure out where you are, like just as I described. Where am I? But even to figure out that is sometimes difficult. And you might be swapping and going back and forth. But there's one constant, and that's the chanting of the holy names. And the chanting of the holy names is actually directly connected to the highest form of rasa, prema. Golokera premadhana, harinama sankirtana. Golokera premadhana. This is a direct gift from the spiritual world. Golokera premadhana. It's a gift of pure love. Harinama sankirtan. So just chanting these names is very simple, very easy. We can all do it. The more we do it in japa, the more we do it in congregation, the more we develop a taste for it. We don't really have to be too concerned about our difficulties. We should be aware of our difficulties. We should be aware of the ideal, but our focus is the chanting of the holy names. The more we focus on that, there will be some progress. There will be some detachment. There will be some, upward movement, but not because you're rejecting something, but because you're becoming more and more attached, to the holy name. The holy name purifies. The holy name ultimately, Bhaktivinoda Thakur spoke out really nicely this whole sequence. I have to find it again, where he says, japa, chanting the holy names, is the highest form of meditation, the highest form of pranayama, the highest form of detachment, the highest form of worship, the highest form of, and he goes on and on and on and on, really, really long. This very simple method, if you analyze it from any angle, it's actually the supreme process. There is nothing higher than chanting in absorption the holy name, especially japa, individual japa. That's where we make our individual progress. And the Harinam Sankirtan in congregation, when we chant together as devotees, that's when we get, you could say, blessings, when we get, when we might be able to taste some nectar. But ultimately, we have to individually also develop this, tastes, and this happens in the japa time. So the combination of the two is the actual cure. Detachment, renunciation, it's all relevant and important, but it's not going to save us. And if you take just detachment and renunciation away from the chanting of the holy name, then it's very frustrating. It's horrible, actually. So not horrible, we want horrible. Okay, I'll stop here now. Something you want to ask? Yes. Yeah, very good question. So Prabhupada sometimes says, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, something like, if you don't, if you're not detached and you're not controlling the senses, you won't be able to actually, taste Krishna. But then it also says, you can only give up, the attachment to sense objects if you have taste for the holy name. That's more or less the dilemma. So actually, it's very simple. You could say the knowledge and renunciation creates the basis on which, when you chant Hare Krishna, you literally very easily can attain, a direct connection. And a good example for that is Bhakti Charu Swami, who had he passed away a few years ago already, the spiritual master of Gauranga Gunarnava. Bhakti Charu Maharaj, he was a student in Germany, very, he really had he was together, you say in English. He was very disciplined, very dedicated, and he was from a Bengali family, aristocratic family, and he came to the West to study. And when he met the devotees in Germany, he thought, these guys, they're weird, because they were not very, they were like, crazy hippies, who were like, yeah, let's chant Hare Krishna, Haribol, So he was a little bit, confused actually, and but then he got to read the books and understand the whole, culture tradition behind it, and he realized, oh, I'm related to this already. So for him, the progress was really fast, So within half a year, he was a sannyasi, and then he was the personal servant of Srila Prabhupada, He joined very late. He joined, I think, maybe 75 or 76 even. So he was only with Prabhupada, for the last, 1.5 years, something like that. Maybe a little bit longer. You have to research a little bit, but not very long. He joined certainly after 75. So towards the very end, but he had a level of knowledge and renunciation, discipline. So on this foundation, his chanting of Hare Krishna progressed really fast. Because it was already there. So now the question is, but if you don't have it, what do you focus on? If you don't have, maybe it's not really your nature to be like disciplined, or it might be just difficult for you, So then if you focus on discipline and detachment, it's probably not going to work, So because there are two rails, it says, on the path of Bhakti Yoga, we have the Parancharatrika Marga and the Bhagavad Marga. This are the two rails. And a train ideally has, with 2 tracks, really good, But Prabhupada says, if you have to give up one of them, which one you give up? You give up Pancharatrika Marga, the rules and regulations, and you just maintain Bhagavad Marga. That you should never give up, which is, Bhagavad Marga means Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. So chanting, hearing, chanting, and meditating, upon Krishna, Vishnu. So, and Prabhupada then explains that actually spiritual life can, run only on Bhagavad Marga. And pure devotees only practice Bhagavad Marga, Pure devotees, they just sit down and chant. That's all they do, because it's the essence, So the secondary 6 elements of bhakti, they are Pancharatrika Marga, or a Vaidhi Marga, rules, regulations, and they are supportive, and they're also very, very important. And devotees, can attain perfection through any of them. But if you have to give up any of them, then it's those 6, because the holy name, those 3 contain everything else. Actually, they contain everything else. So like that, ideally you have 2 tracks. That's the best, But if for some reason you have to give up, something, like I was traveling the last 6-7 years so much around the world, so you just have those 3. What else do you have, really? Those 3 nobody can take away from you. You don't need a temple. You don't need to be expert at prayers. You don't need to be fully surrendered. You don't need to have a whole puja plate with you always. Even I usually had, small one at least. But those 3 you can always do. If you're traveling for 3 days, in a row, how are you going to do your puja? But you can chant. You can always chant. I actually have to. I chanted my best rounds when I was traveling. When I was hitchhiking alone somewhere, on the highway, I chanted so many rounds. So you can always chant. That's the essence. So it's like that. If you have a foundation of, if it's very good, if you have the more culture of, of renunciation, detachment, discipline you have, the easier, of course, Bhakti Yoga will progress. Shravanam Kirtan will happen easy and naturally. But if you don't have this foundation, we need to maintain some level, for sure, always, some basic, you could say, items you just have to give up, for example, eating meat, But for most people, that's very easy, Many people don't even notice, that they had this attachment, because ultimately the principle is always param drishtva nivartante, the higher taste, That's what we're trying to live from. If you have a higher taste, it's natural to give up something lower, So, I don't think there's any devotee really. Maybe there's a very few cases who, after being a devotee, started eating meat again. I think it's pretty rare, because you have a higher taste. You have a, like usually people who have been vegetarians for a long time, if they eat meat again, the body actually repulses it. Have you heard about it? The body literally, if you eat it, you have to throw up. You can't handle it. You have to readjust the body. Literally, push the tamas on top of it, that it, again starts, getting attached to it and enjoying it. So it's like that. If you attain a higher taste, it's, it's not interesting, something lower, So that's our main focus, and that comes through chanting, that comes through kirtan, and the more we expand it, the more kirtan is if kirtan is always there in some way or other, you will be able to progress, even if you might be completely distracted, lost, For many years, when I was 15 until 19, I was not really practicing Krishna consciousness at all, actually. But I always still loved kirtan, somehow. Kirtan and prasadam, ki jai, What's wrong with that, It's perfect. So, yeah, somehow, that gave me, I guess, maybe the opportunity to then, again, re-enter, fully. So, yeah, higher taste. Something else? Grantara Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.